Welcome into the Saints Insider Podcast. It is Wednesday, February the 19th. I'm Zach Ewing with Rod Walker, Luke Johnson, and Matthew Paris. And lots of Saints news rolling in this shortened offseason. The Combine's already just a week away. Like, it's crazy how fast things go when you have a Super Bowl in town and you don't have a head coach until after that Super Bowl.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me, man. And we got Mardi Gras right after the Combine. Like, we'll see if Matt and I actually survive the next 2 weeks.
I have faith in you. You'll be okay.
I don't.
Which part? The Mardi Gras part?
Both.
All right. Well, your livers will have to do a lot of work, I think.
I think so.
Weeks. So, all right. The first order of business for new Saints head coach Kellen Moore, of course, is to name his new staff, and he has started to do that. Really, almost completed doing that on the offensive side of the ball. The new offensive coordinator, we believe, will be Doug Nussmeier.
His Wikipedia page actually has him already updated.
Well, if Wikipedia says it. I mean, who can doubt it?
Right.
Yeah, which Saints
nice
Twitter personality? Yeah.
The Wikipedia page, which also says Kellen Moore, like, owns the Kansas City Chiefs or something, Yeah. So Doug Nussmeier is not official yet, but it looks trending that way. The rest of his staff is more finalized. Quarterbacks coach will be Scott Tolzien. Wide receivers coach, he's retaining Keith Williams. Joel Thomas will be the running backs coach back in New Orleans, and then he also has, is it Brandon Nugent? I'm thinking
Brendan Nugent is the offensive line coach. He spent a number of years here, mostly working under Dan Rocher. God, I'm probably mispronouncing his name. I've done it a billion times. And then Chase Hazlitt as a tight ends coach.
We're a little bit behind on the defensive side of things, and that's obviously you've got to hire the coordinator and let him bring in his people on that. We still think it's probably Brandon Staley. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I would say he's the leader in the clubhouse. Yeah. And I think this has kind of progressed the way a lot of us figured it would, right? Nussmeier and Staley were kind of the leaders from the very beginning, and I think they've done a little bit more legwork on the defensive side of the ball. We've seen him kind of interview a number of guys who have been defensive coordinators before, but it still feels like if Staley wants a job, it's his job.
Yeah, and you look at the guys he's hired. I mean, he's kind of worked with most of these guys at some point, either in Dallas or in LA. So I think Staley's probably, he fits that criteria as well. So.
It's also shaping up to be a very young staff.
Yeah,
most of these guys are in their 30s and 40s. Even the guy that they hired to have a role in their running game, he's 35.
And Tolzien's like 32, I think.
Is Doug Nussmeier the oldest?
Yeah, he's 54.
He's got to be the oldest. And he's also interviewed Durante Jones and Christian Parker for that defensive coordinator position, two other pretty young guys. But Staley would be the guy who brings head coaching experience. Even as a young head coach, at least he's kind of been through the wars and can, hey, look out for this, or this is going to go that way. Even though it wasn't successful, at least he had some experience and can give some pointers in certain areas.
Yeah, you can offer some guidance.
So we'll talk more, I think, about the defensive side of the ball when that gets finalized. We're thinking probably by the end of the week.
Friday's
podcast
feels like it almost has to, just because they have to go into the combine knowing what kind of players they're looking for. They could take a guess, but that's really kind of defeats the purpose of being there.
Yeah, it's getting late early. They're gonna have to get this done. So, but today we did want to talk more about the offensive side of the ball, and because that side of the staff is almost finalized, and specifically, Rod, the question of Derek Carr, which is the next huge, mega, maybe the most important thing that Kellen Moore and his staff must decide in conjunction with Mickey Loomis in the front office this offseason. And that is what to do with Derek Carr.
Yeah, I think that is the most important decision. And, we talked about the press conference last week, his introductory press conference, and, he didn't commit one way or the other. So I think they're going to, we're talking about getting his defensive staff together, but that's priority number one, I think, is figure out, which direction you want to go in with the offense with Carr.
Right. And Luke, you wrote a big story that people can read. I think came out last Friday. It was in the Times-Picayune Sunday. They kind of have four options here, and we're going to go through each of those four options. Technically, maybe there's some, gray area in between some of the options. Like they could restructure his contract part of the way, but not all of the way. But the main four, and we'll go through them in this order, are you keep Carr, and basically you need to restructure his contract if you do that. The second one would be to just cut him outright. The third one would be to make him a post-June 1st cut. And the fourth one would be to try to find a trade partner.
Right.
So
and the trade one is we'll get into it is probably if you are going to move on from him, the trade is the most palatable option, but I think that's the most complex one. You have to find a taker, and Carr would have to also approve it.
Right. It takes two to tango, and in this case, it almost takes three to tango.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about that. But we're going to start with the idea of keeping Derek Carr. And I know this is maybe the least palatable option to people out there. Like, I'm done with him. I don't want him. I do think, Matt, like if you're going to be competitive in 2025, this is the easiest way to get there. Not the only way, but the easiest way.
Yeah. I mean, you can already see the people in Luke's mentions who clipped out the one comment
the one line out of a nuanced conversation. That was cool.
But they would be competitive, but they were 5-5 in the games. He was healthy. He played really well in stretches. He also lost to the Carolina Panthers. Like, you kind of wonder just where the team is going. But this is the thing we've always talked about, is they don't view themselves as in line with the rest of the league or in step with everyone else's opinion, which is good and bad. And, you know, hearing Kellen Moore saying we can compete for the division, we can win, you know, maybe they view Derek Carr as the best option to do that. But for the long-term health of the franchise, I kind of think they're facing they have to make those tough decisions.
Yeah, I mean, competitive can mean different things. Competitive could be 8-9. Like, you're competitive. You won almost half of your games.
You could also win the division.
But that doesn't, well, you could. But that doesn't, like, that's not what the ultimate goal is here. And I also think, I don't know, if you could guarantee me that Derek Carr was going to stay healthy for 17 games and that most of his key pieces were going to stay healthy for 17 games, then that option becomes a lot more attractive to me. Ron.
Yeah, and I think if you're Kellen Moore, you might go back and look at those first two games from last season and say, you know what, I think I can win if we're healthy. And
we've cautioned against that, though. You can't look at those two games and look at them as a representative sample size. I know that's not what you're trying to do. Yeah. But they we've talked, like, they can't talk themselves into it based off of two games.
Right. But I think this is a front office that probably can talk themselves.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That was my point. I think. And, but yeah, I mean, the team just wasn't healthy, and I think this is a front office that could probably convince themselves that, you know, Carr I think it's 14-13 over the 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, 9-8 and 5-5. So
14-13. So I mean, you can sustain, but I mean, you're gonna have the future probably doesn't look as bright as it could, and fan base obviously is not gonna be happy with Carr back. So, but I mean, you can't make these decisions based on that either.
So I think, like, they need to look at it. Like, they need to look at it through this lens. Is Derek Carr's ceiling, which I think we've established is like middle tier NFL quarterback. He's not as awful as everybody thinks he is, right, but he's not a great quarterback either.
His ceiling might be a little higher than that. Now that's not what
his sustained ceiling. I'm not talking about like what he can do in an individual game. I'm talking about what he can do over the course of a full season, because we know he is this.
Right.
So is what you're going to get out of him worth what you're going to pay him? And that's all, right? And is it worth it to continue to kind of, like, you know, push this thing down the road a little bit? Is it worth it if he's not part of your long-term plans, right? I think there's no question that if you look at this roster right now, he is the best quarterback on the roster right now. I know people don't love the stats stuff with Derek Carr. You know, they say it's all, you know, loaded up in blowout losses or whatever. But, like, I mean, over the course of the year, EPA per dropback, expected points added, it's like the best stat you can look at for a quarterback. 11th in the NFL last year, right behind Joe Burrow, who was an MVP candidate.
Yeah, we've had these conversations ad nauseum. Like, they were this close to being a lot better than they were.
And the two guys who replaced him in the lineup, out of 77 quarterbacks who threw a pass last year, were 64th and 65th. Like, there's a huge divide between those two. So if you're saying, like, hey, he's clearly the best quarterback on the team right now, we know that it's going to cost us a lot against the cap, whether he's on the team or not, and we want to see what we can do with him with Kellen Moore running the show, and sure. But if you're looking at him saying like he's not going to be on our team past the 2026 season, and we're just riding this out because we don't really have much option, it's like, well, at that point, what's the point in keeping him around if he's not part of your long-term vision for a first-year head coach, for a first-time head coach? Like unless you get the perfect scenario like the Chiefs where you have Alex Smith, who's very much similar quarterback to Derek Carr, and then you somehow draft the next greatest of all time, like Patrick Mahomes. Like, sure, that worked out great, but like that doesn't happen very often. So I don't know. I think this is a deeply nuanced conversation about it, and a lot of it depends on their finances.
To build on that, the other aspect we haven't talked about this, which would maybe be an argument to keep him, is they're so far in the hole cap-wise that the easiest way to get out of it for this year is to restructure him. I know that's one of the options we'll get to, but like they're over $50 million over the cap right now. They need a lot to get there, and by making him a pre-June 1 release, like that's just keeping $50 million in dead money on your books the whole year, where like trying to restructure, I mean, I think you were doing this the other day, right? You tried to restructure everything without touching Carr at all, like that.
You'd have to basically restructure everybody. You'd have to push more money into the future for Cam Jordan and DeMario Davis and Taysom Hill, guys who are in their mid-30s who are clearly, on the downside of their careers.
Yeah, and that's why you say it's another option. It's really, these are one and the same. If you're going to keep him, you're probably going to now that doesn't mean you need to restructure him down to the veteran minimum or anything like that. Like you don't have to go all the way, but just to give yourself some sort of wiggle room, A, to get out of other contracts that are getting expensive and aren't going to get any cheaper, and B, to surround him, maybe at least dabble in free agency and give him something to work with next year. You have to create something. Like if you're going to keep him, I think restructuring him is part and parcel with that.
I mean, almost definitely. But like then, this is such a complex issue because his cap hit next year is $61 million. Right? So if you're restructuring him, his cap hit next year is going to be like, I don't know the math. Right in front of me, it's probably like $70 million. 75. I mean,
now the rest of their
massive
cap situation next year is a little bit better because they got some other guys coming off the books. So maybe you could.
Right. They've got $48 million in dead money accounted for this year for 3 players. 2 of them were not even on the roster last year. 2 of them last played for the team in 2023, and another one only played like 7 games for him last year. It's Jameis Winston, Mike Thomas, and Marshawn Lattimore. $48 million. And if they move on from Carr, it's a $50.5 million dead cap hit. So that'd be $99 million in 4 players.
That's not even counting Ramczyk yet.
Not even counting Ramczyk, and that's another thing that we'll get into with the post-June 1st stuff. If assuming that is going to be the route they take with him, then you only have one other spot left to use a post-June 1st cut on. So it's complicated.
Okay, so that leads us into option 2, which is kind of the nuclear option here, and that is to cut Derek Carr outright, and that would have to be done by March 15th. Is that right? The third day of the league year.
Okay. So it would have to be. I mean, realistically, it'd have to be done by March 12th, first day of the new league year, because they're going to have to be cap compliant, right? So they're going to have made a decision. But March 15th, his base salary for 2025 guarantees if he's on the roster. Yeah. Third day of the new league year. So
March
that's
12th
$30 million.
That is 3 weeks from today.
Come on, man.
So that
don't remind me.
That decision
no
has
time
to be
off.
made. And again, Rod, this is the nuclear option. This is, we want a reset. This is the surest sign that the Saints are going to reset. It either means that they're going to hand the quarterback reins to Spencer Rattler, or I guess theoretically Jake Haener, or they're going to draft a quarterback or go out and get a cheap option in free agency. And I don't know exactly how cheap. Justin Fields is probably out of your price range at that point. You're looking at Jameis Winston. You're looking at maybe a couple of other options, and what a twist that would be. But in any event, if you do this, you are incurring a $50.1 million cap hit, and you're only saving like $1 million off the cap. It's basically negligible. but you have allowed yourself, at least after this season, to reset.
Yeah, and I think, and I know I keep going back to the fans and what they would want. I think fans will probably be okay with that. I think they're willing to sacrifice one really bad season and part ways with Carr. But I don't know. I mean, I'm saying that now, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if Rattler's the answer. But I mean, Kellen Moore may think he can win with Rattler. I mean, he may be a guy. I mean, he's a little bit more mobile, and that's kind of quarterbacks he's kind of dealt with. So maybe that's something he feels like he can work with for 1 year.
Yeah, and I mean, we should also, when we're talking about how bad they were last year without Carr, it's understanding that it was a rookie quarterback, a fifth-round rookie quarterback who clearly has talent, but he was also dealing with some really bad situations roster-wise. Yeah. I mean, Carr was too, but not quite to the extent that Rattler was. I mean, like
Carr wasn't throwing to MVS, Mason Tipton, and
and I think there was even a game where MVS wasn't in the lineup. It was like Bub Means and Mason Tipton and I can't even remember, like Dante Pettis. Pettis. I mean, like guys who were out of the league or late round draft picks or undrafted free agents with a second-rate offensive line in front of them, with Alvin Kamara missing 3 games at the end of the year. I mean, it was like tough for literally anybody to put like good tape out there. So like, I don't think we should just like say, well, last year this is what Spencer Rattler is, even though I do believe that Carr is a much better quarterback than he is at this stage of his career. But I mean, I think when you're talking about like the just outright release, if you can finagle a way to get under the cap, but while still doing that, and he's not part of your, I mean, I think that makes the most sense. If you can find a way to get cap compliant while eating $50+ million in dead cap, and you're really setting yourself up to be closer to like a healthy salary cap position in 2026 and 2027 at that point. I think if you're going to make a move, that to me makes the most sense rather than trying to do the June 1st thing, which you're going to have to carry that $50+ million all the way to June, so it's not going to help you at all building your 2025 roster.
Yeah, the June 1st thing isn't palatable at all. I mean, one thing, I'd have to go back. I was talking to someone last year about this, and he said, well, if you do the June 1st thing, you could finagle it to where, like, while you carry his $50 million, I believe you can restructure that or something, or turn that into an option bonus. Like, there's ways that you can massage it, but even then, it's to a credit to the Saints that they've been able to find ways to make this work while it being so complicated. But you do have to get back to normal at some point, and they've taken steps to get back to normal. Like I think maybe that's the thing some people overlook is like last year they did take those steps to become healthier with the salary cap. They had a quiet free agency by their standards. I think they're on pace to do that again this year. And so, by doing it before June 1st, you're just taking the medicine all at once. And he's the biggest dose of medicine that they could have. Like, we can talk about the other veterans, but he's the guy that, like, they eat that, then they're in much better financial shape, I think.
Yeah, to me, that's the big thing here is, can you do it? Can you get cap compliant while cutting Derek Carr? If you can, this becomes a much more realistic option.
Yeah, and I just think if they're truly trying to set themselves up to be in a healthy spot cap wise in the future, like this does make the most sense. If that's the decision you're going to make to move on from them, just rip the Band-Aid off and deal with the fact that it's going to be tough to build a roster when you're almost. Like it'd be like 40% of their cap would be tied up in 4 players in dead money.
Rod, that's kind of the other aspect of this is Kellen Moore's first year. He probably has maybe the longest leash of any head coach in the NFL. Like he's going to be given time. That has to have been part of the conversation when he came in. But you're also a first year head coach. You're 36 years old. You don't want to come in and go 4-13. I mean, and if Derek Carr is cut and you have no ability to add in free agency, that's probably the sort of expectations that they're looking at. That's not to say that they couldn't exceed those expectations, but I think that's probably part of this discussion too.
Yeah, and we've talked about how this roster has, a bunch of holes in it. I mean, he does need to it's not just about the quarterback position. I mean, they got to get better on the defensive line. They got to get better on the offensive line. Secondary probably needs to get a little better. So
Just want to name every position.
yeah, basically, I mean, that's kind of what it is.
The kicker was good.
Yeah. So I do think that I think if that's what they're going to do, I mean, they just have to realize that, he probably will be, you said 4-13, which might be pushing it a little bit. But so I think this is setting up, I think, to be, especially if they do that, I mean, I think it's setting up to be that kind of a year. And I do think that if you're a first-year coach, you don't want to have that kind of season because it's just, you come in, you want to win, you want to be successful right away, like some coaches have been, and I think he definitely not want that to be the case for him. So.
Yeah. So that leads us to option 3, which you guys discussed a little bit. This is the post June 1st cut, and this would save so the Saints would have to carry his full amount until June 1st, the $51.5 million. But then if they cut him after that, they save $30 million off of that number, which is a significant amount. But as you said, what do you do with it in June? I mean, basically every key free agent.
It'd be basically rolling it over to next year,
right?
Hey, that's what it. But like that'd be rolling over to account for the dead money that you're gonna have to pay in next year's cap. So yeah, it's really 6 1, half dozen the other to me. And just for clarity's sake, they don't have to wait until June 1st to cut them. It's just a designation. So they could cut him tomorrow and designate him a post June 1st cut, and somebody could sign him next week, and his money would still be on the Saints' books until
they still have to get
until June 2nd
under the cap number, even while he's on another team until they get the June 1st relief. Which, like, man, I don't know. What do we do? Like again, it feels pointless. It's
right.
Just,
you might as well just eat the $50 million this year. I don't really see the point of having that extra space at that stage. And like, no, I'm not like a cap scientist here. I'm sure there are benefits to it, like real benefits, to have that wiggle room into the season. But as far as building out the 2025 roster, it's not going to help at all.
Could you, with that extra room in the summer, kind of restructure some contracts in the other way where you say, hey, let's give you more money up front and lessen the cap hit in future years? I mean, again, I don't know what the point in doing that is. I'm just trying to.
No, there's nothing you can do. That money's already it's like already accounted for. Like it's already bonus money that's been paid out, and the future year aspect of it is just an accounting measure. So it's just taking the money that you've paid out and spreading out the load.
The money's not real.
Yeah. Well, it's like the whole like cap versus cash.
Yeah.
Okay,
so now that we've sort of eliminated option 3 as being,
I mean, they could still do it.
They could still do it,
but like Ramczyk is probably going to be a post June 1st cut, right?
Depending on how they feel about Taysom Hill, that's the other option we haven't talked about.
But here's the problem with like Taysom. If they cut him post June 1st or otherwise, I mean, like they're going to account for the exact same cap hit regardless, like because of the way they've pushed money into future years. I think they'd save like $270,000 against a cap if they cut him, which is
you might as well keep him.
Might as well keep him
out of him. Yeah.
Cam Jordan, it'd be like an extra $4 million if they cut him, because it would accelerate the money they've pushed into future years. It's same sort of deal with DeMario, and I think Tyron is like they'd save like $500,000. So it's like moving on from these guys isn't really a palatable option either, unless you just want to replace them with somebody younger, and have somebody younger and cheaper on the roster in their place, because you think they're better players. But like in terms of like financial relief, like not really going to get it out of those guys.
Well, just bring this back to Carr too. Like Kellen Moore's answer on Taysom Hill, for instance, was much more glowing. He seemed much more excited to coach Taysom Hill than maybe Derek Carr, even though. Can you do the Kellen Moore thing by heart? Derek is a tremendous quarterback who has a history of playing at Fresno State, Las Vegas, and New Orleans. I have a ton of respect for what he's done here, and I'm excited to go through this process with him.
Yeah, something like that. It's like, thanks for the bio.
The Oscar
Appreciate
goes to
famous quotes preceding unfortunate events, like will he ever actually coach Derek Carr remains to be seen. I think there was a quote floating around that Sean Payton said about Aaron Brooks in 2006 and said something very similar of, oh, he's a great competitor and I look forward to working with him. And then 2 weeks later, he wasn't on the team. So it doesn't mean a lot. Option number 4, and maybe the most complicated and intriguing one. Could the Saints trade Derek Carr? There's a couple of things to know here. First of all, Luke, trading him, assuming that the new team takes on his entire contract, saves the Saints how much?
I think it's $11 million against the cap.
So not a ton, but
the most palatable in terms of just the salary cap for sure. I think if they could pull that off, again, this is all operating under the assumption that we're down this road that they want to move on from him, right? Because they might want to keep him. We just don't know. If they want to move on, this is the most palatable option by far. They recoup some cap money. They would get some assets, even if it's a late round draft pick. It's better than nothing, right? And you're just kind of more free to move on from that point. So I think that if they could pull that off, I think that'd be a pretty big win for the organization. If again, assuming they don't want to keep Derek Carr in this scenario, but like, there's going to be a lot of potentially a lot of big name veteran quarterbacks on the market this year. Matthew Stafford might be available in a trade. I think teams would be much more willing to consider that than Derek Carr. Aaron Rodgers could probably be had for a fairly inexpensive number if you want to go down that road. But I don't know if at this stage of his career, maybe Carr's a better player than Aaron Rodgers, which feels weird to say. Kirk Cousins, I think we can all agree, is probably going to be on the market. Russell Wilson's going to be on the market probably. So yeah, there's other options out there for teams who need a quarterback, who want a veteran quarterback that could be more palatable than taking on Derek Carr's contract.
And Carr has no trade clause.
And that too.
Do you think Carr wants to be here? I mean, would he accept the trade? Like, he probably doesn't accept a trade anywhere, but it feels to me like he may be ready to move on.
Are we getting truth serum Derek Carr or Derek Carr public persona?
Truth serum Derek Carr, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you got him to be honest, he'd probably be willing to move on. I think it's been a really rough 2 years here for him. The fan base never latched onto him. I think he's had his own role to play in that. It's been hard building the team here. Head coach was fired. It's like I don't think he'd mind a new opportunity. I think he'd probably want to, especially if the team is like, yeah, we're kind of cooling on you.
I mean, this is where, like, the social media stuff with his brother, you can mention. I'm like, for those.
Which one?
Yeah, right. For those unaware, one of Derek Carr's brothers posted, like, when the 57-7 thing with Kellen Moore beating Derek Carr in college went around, Derek Carr's brother posted, like, Derek Carr career stats versus Kellen Moore's career stats, and had this thing about career earnings and, like,
yeah. And on the one hand, like,
trying to defend your brother, I get it, but also, why would you do that to your brother who has to work with the new head coach? Like, that to me signals, okay, maybe Derek is ready to move on if his family is not, like, I don't think Chris Olave, like Josh Olave isn't speaking for Chris Olave, and same thing here.
Right.
Versus, but, like, it just signals to me that maybe he's acting that way because he feels like he can.
yeah, although he's done a little bit of that regardless.
Sure.
We're talking about Darren Carr, not David. Darren is the middle brother. And
Right.
like, to have the 57-7 conversation, like, if you're sitting here using that to argue that Kellen Moore is a better quarterback than Derek Carr, you're not having a serious conversation.
No, absolutely
And
not.
like, Kellen Moore did not make it in the league. Derek Carr has had a largely successful. You don't make it 11 years in the NFL unless you're a good quarterback.
As a starting quarterback.
Like, come on. We're not. Anybody who's sitting here saying, "Oh, Kellen Moore might be a better option than," come on, stop it.
Player coach, man.
Right. Just because they played a game in college 15 years ago and it ended 57-7 because fifth-year senior Kellen Moore had a much better team around him than sophomore Derek Carr did. Like,
I'm just saying the reaction to that.
I understand what you're saying. I just wanted
to,
I just wanted to make that point. But I do think between that and Rod, the other thing that we've talked about is not every Saints player, but a lot of Saints players made the rounds in New Orleans on Super Bowl week. We saw Cam Jordan every single day. We didn't see Chris Olave, I don't believe.
I saw Chris Olave.
Okay, you did see Chris. Like,
I ran into Chris.
We saw a lot of the linemen. Cesar Ruiz was making the rounds. Alvin Kamara made some rounds.
Brian Brzee.
Spencer Rattler made some rounds. Bub Means was out there. Like, yeah,
don't,
guys.
Don't forget.
Can Charlie Smith get some love, man?
Charlie Smith and Blake Grupe, man.
Charlie Smith.
Blake Grupe was on this. Both of them.
Blake Grupe, they were on our show. Like,
Blake
a lot of
Grupe
them
had to make sure. Yeah, he probably got triple checked by security. They're like, you're a player.
And we're
Sorry,
we're super
Charlie
appreciative
Smith
of
was on
all
the
of
media
that.
bus,
Like,
so.
yeah, but the main guy who did not make a single appearance all week, not at a public event, not at Radio Row, not on anybody's podcast, nothing, was Derek Carr. And to me, that's telling of where he stands. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, because I said that at first, and then I was like, maybe, he may have had plans and just wasn't here. So I don't know if you have to be in New Orleans. I mean, I think it would have, like, if he was here, people were going to complain about it. He couldn't win. He's like in a no-win situation with this fan base at this point. So I try not to read too much into that. I mean, I did see he posted some Instagram pictures from I think they were on some kind of vacation, but that wasn't during the Super Bowl week. It's like yesterday. But, I mean, you never know. There were some guys who weren't here. I mean, we named the ones that were, but there were some, like, I didn't see.
See Eric McCoy? I didn't see Eric McCoy.
I didn't see Kyle Hergel.
Eric McCoy was in town. I know that. Alvin Kamara was in town, but I don't think Alvin did any.
I saw Kamara at the parade.
Yeah.
I mean,
he was doing stuff like GQ.
Yeah. So,
of course.
But I do think as the face of the franchise, you kind of,
Right.
I mean, he's the quarterback of
Do
the
you
franchise.
have to be there? No, you don't have to be. Like, if he comes back, if the Saints bring him back and Carr has a successful season, no one's going to remember that he wasn't there for Super Bowl week. I just think if you're trying to read the tea leaves of where he stands and where the Saints stand, that might be an important.
No, I agree with that.
Yes. I will note, though, that they had Sean Payton stand in as Saints coach for next to Cale Benson on
the Bourbon Street.
On the Bourbon Street,
like
that because they didn't have a coach. So things are in flux. But
put Demario Davis in the back row.
Right. So, I mean, Demario, I guess, was the Saints player representative for that. But I don't know. I mean, I also don't think he's incentivized to help them at all. I mean, we saw this with Vegas. He said he had a no-trade clause. Did he have a no-trade clause? Yeah, he had a no-trade clause then.
Yeah.
And said, like, no, you're cutting me. And he wanted full control. The other thing we haven't talked about this, and I kind of would if we're okay on time, is what teams do you think would make sense for him to trade for him? Because I actually think a team like the Titans, makes a lot of sense.
Titans makes the most sense.
Titans, and then if the Giants miss out on Stafford.
What about the Jets? That was the third team I kind of.
Well, if you believe Aaron Glenn didn't want this job, and part of that is because
There could be a lot of reasons Aaron Glenn didn't want this job, but
I mean, if he wasn't rushing to get here, why would he be rushing to work with Derek Carr? Would be my question about that. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's not rooted in anything. That one to me doesn't make as much sense as say the Titans do or the.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Titans make a lot more sense. But we just have no idea what they think. Like they could be like, we really love Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, and they've got the number one pick. So they could go that route. Yeah, I don't know what their cap situation is, but I'm imagining it's probably in a fairly good spot considering they've had Will Levis as their starting quarterback for 2 years. So
that's what you need. You need a team with a lot of cap space to take on this contract and a needed quarterback. The Titans have hinted a little bit that maybe they won't take a quarterback at number one. They've said, if there's a generational player available, which you can take, what you mean? Does that mean Travis Hunter? Does that mean Abdul Carter? Or does that could mean a quarterback? We don't know, but it does sound like they're open to using that number one pick for something else. And they could also, if they solve quarterback, do what the Bears did a couple years ago and trade that pick for a king's ransom to some other team that desperately does want a quarterback.
Right.
These guys?
Sorry. Yeah. Derek Carr is part of the package for the Saints to move up to number one. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. You threw that out there.
That is for the record, listeners. I was not being serious.
Because somebody will sit there and say, number 9 and Derek Carr for number 1.
According to the Times Picayune, is Luke Johnson.
Yes.
Right.
Number 1 Derek Carr supporter. So
Drew a plaque.
Yeah. I think this conversation illustrates it's a really complicated issue for the Saints to solve this year, and I think they need to have. If they do decide to run it back with them, we're going to be having the same conversation next year, because we had the same conversation last year. So I think they've got to be prepared for. If they decide to keep him on the roster and to make themselves cap compliant that way, they just need to understand that they're possibly setting themselves back on really resetting the trajectory of this franchise right away. And if that's what they want to do in order to be as competitive as possible this year, then that's their prerogative. I just think that it's hard to see. It's hard to see an avenue throughout this entire thing where he is the long-term answer, like multiple year answer at quarterback for Kellen Moore.
Okay, so those are the 4 options. Keep Carr, which probably means restructuring his contract. I mean, yes, keep Carr, which probably means restructuring his contract because there's almost no other way to get cap compliant without it. Cutting Carr, which means you still have to get cap compliant somehow with the same hit. Post June 1st cut, which maybe has some small benefits but isn't appreciably different from just cutting him outright. And then the 4th one would be to explore a trade, which is complicated. You can't guarantee that you're going to be able to do it. So here's a question. 2 questions. What would you do in the Saints situation, and what do you think the Saints will ultimately do?
Who do you want to start with?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I just throw something out there. I don't know. And both of my answers are going to be the same, but I do think that they're probably going to move on from him, and I think if they can somehow pull off a trade, I'm going to even throw out a really odd team, but with the Raiders, and he goes back to Las Vegas.
Oh, Rod.
Man.
I mean, I thought about that.
I mean, you got
just
Pete
don't think
Carroll.
I love you for that, man. That's awesome.
I'm just going to throw it out there, and that way you're getting some of your money back, and you've kind of moved on, and I think that's what they're going to do.
I think the Raiders fan base likes him better than the Saints fan base does.
Oh, I don't know about that.
We get a lot of comments on stuff saying Raiders fan here, we miss Derek. They haven't had a good quarterback since then. I don't think it's realistic. It is closer to his home.
It's usually not good when you go back to a place that you left. But I do think Carr really liked Vegas. I mean, he talks about it a lot, and so I'm sending him back out west.
All right. So that's your answer. I mean, if it were me, I think I'd keep him. I think you stay more competitive. You're not gaining a whole lot by cutting him, and you use him as a bridge for one more year until you can draft a quarterback in a much better 2026 draft class. That's what I would do. What the Saints will do, I think that they're going to cut him, but that's ultimately you guys know a lot more about that than I do. So, Luke, what do you think?
So, if it were me, I would probably release him this year, and I would eat the $50 million and figure out a way to get cap compliant. As difficult as that's going to be, they can do it. It's going to be tight, and I think the reason I would do that is because if you are talking about resetting next year and finding your quarterback of the future and having Carr be a bridge, like if Carr goes out there and wins 9 games for you this year.
Right.
You're looking at a middle of the first round draft pick, and in a good quarterback class, if it is going to be a good quarterback class like we think, I mean, it's going to be next to impossible to get up. We saw how many teams tried to move up in the top 3 this past year to get one of Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, or Drake May. Like a bunch of teams were really trying to move up with the Patriots, and the Patriots were like, no, not doing it. I don't care what you're going to offer. So like I just think that if you're going to be like mildly competitive with Derek Carr, and you're picking somewhere in the 14 to 20 range, like the odds of you getting that guy are much worse. So, yeah, I think it just makes the most sense to just, if he's not part of your long-term future, just move on now. Go through what might be a difficult year. See what you have in Spencer Rattler on second year of his rookie contract and a very, very inexpensive rookie contract. And if he's not the guy, then you know 2026 we're going to go get our quarterback. We feel like we have a pretty good roster outside of that, and see what happens. So, will the Saints make that move? I mean, I don't know. We've seen like a little bit of both sides of this argument from like some of the national reporters saying like, well, the front office likes Derek Carr, and well, they really like what Spencer Rattler showed last year. Kind of hints that they're getting from people within the building or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. Most logical conclusion feels like they probably keep him, but maybe not. I really don't know where I land on that.
All right, Matt.
I think they're going to take the medicine of the 50 all at once, and I think that's what they should do. I just think the lukewarm answer was telling. He could have easily come out and said maybe he didn't want to do that. Maybe he wanted Derek to buy in if there's still time to hit the bell. In Washington, in Ron Rivera's first year, his opening press conference gave a very lukewarm answer on Dwayne Haskins. Did that to motivate Haskins so he'd win the starting job. And it wasn't really a competition, but they brought in someone like Kyle Allen to compete with him. But Rivera made a really big mistake by keeping Haskins rather than drafting Justin Herbert with the second overall pick or Tua. Like, not finding that quarterback in year one or not having a plan to get quarterback compliant really was the thing that sunk his tenure. And I think it's a mistake teams make all the time. And I don't know if they recognize that, but I think they see other options out there, whether there is Spencer Rattler, whether it's trading for Kenny Pickett, who Moore worked with in Philadelphia. I think they've kind of settled on Derek Carr and want a new direction. I don't know that for absolutely certain, but it makes the most sense, and I kind of think that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, that's what it feels like to me. Just real quick, we said on the screen here this has to be decided by March the 12th. It technically doesn't have to be decided until the third year of the league year, but because they have to be cap compliant by March 12th, they're going to have to figure this out by then. And I assume you guys are looking at your phones for the same reason I am, that we just got a little bit of breaking news while we were recording here.
Yeah, it was actually I kind of confirmed while we were recording. Saints are in the process of hiring Phil Galliano to be their special teams coordinator. So he was obviously had been here with Rizzi since 2019 and was in the special teams coordinator job last year when Rizzi took over as an interim head coach. Now with Rizzi being in Denver. There's an opening on the staff, so that would be the second coach from last year's team that they retained, with Keith Williams being the other.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap things up, and we'll continue to roll on. We'll podcast Friday about the defensive side of the ball and who Kellen Moore has ultimately hired there. It could mean a total change in scheme, which is a big thing also with this roster that you've got to account for. So we will get an answer on Derek Carr, we think, in the next 3 weeks. And we'll continue to monitor that, but we'll be back on Friday with another podcast. For our producer, Norman Bell, Rod Walker, Luke Johnson, and Matthew Paris, I'm Zach Ewing. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the like button, 5-star review, all of that good stuff. We appreciate all of you, and we will see you next time.